You're listening to episode number 4 of the Play Your Position podcast.
Welcome to the Play Your Position podcast, where your story matters and we make it count. Here's your host, Mary Lou Kaser. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I am super excited to introduce you to my guest today. His name is Mark Donham, and he likes to say that he's just a guy who loves to ride a motorcycle. Online, he's known the world over as Radioman, and he's got a blog that has more than 2 million views and is followed by people around the globe. Mark has experienced some tremendous successes in his life, as well as some tremendous challenges, and he's going to share those with us today. He has an incredible story, and I'm honored to have him on the show. So, Mark, are you ready for kickoff?
I am. I'm looking forward to it.
Terrific. Tell us a little bit more about your story and the position that you're playing in life right now.
Well, I guess I have to step back a little bit in life and say that it doesn't always go as planned. And I had a successful career in the printing industry. My wife worked for Nordstrom for many, many years, and life was all going well. And then it was clear that she was coming down with a family hereditary disease, early onset Alzheimer's disease. So we had to make some serious life changes in life as we confronted this. And so back in 2006, I quit my job to care for Chris full time. Not everybody can do that, and it was a choice to leave a thriving business to do it. But it really was the best thing. And I cared for her for 5 years until she passed away in 2011. And then at that point, I realized I was, facing a new chapter of life and transition. And so I actually jumped on my motorcycle and did a 2.5-year round-the-world motorcycle ride.
And in all fairness, doing a 2.5-year around-the-world motorcycle ride is not something that people do every day. So can you share more about what that was like? Because that was a position that you decided to play after. I mean, you've played several roles. You had your career, and you were a husband, and then you became a caretaker. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But since you brought up the 2.5-year motorcycle ride around the world, share more about what that was like.
Well, when Chris passed away, I sort of looked around, and my stepson was out of the house and was facing going back to into the work world. And I thought, life is really, really short. And one of my favorite quotes is, at the end of their life, no one ever said, I wish I would have worked a few more days at the office. And so at that point, I'm healthy, and I thought, I've always enjoyed travel. And in the meantime, in my mid-40s, I picked up motorcycling again and really enjoyed it as a kind of a mental health time. And so I thought, no, I'm going to combine the two. And I had been reading and following some other riders that had done sort of similar things and thought, okay, I can do this. So that was the start of it. And I didn't really know when I left if it was going to be a 6-month deal or a year and a half. And it ended up being 2.5 years as I traveled around the world. Had some amazing experiences, met amazing people along the way, and got to experience these different cultures in a way that's not normally done by American tourists, especially because of the normal timelines. That was sort of the genesis. But the thing that made it really interesting is sharing online about my ride and my experiences caring for my wife, connecting me with people all over the world that I actually met with, stayed with, rode with, and shared life with, which really was an amazing thing that wouldn't have happened just 10 or 15 years ago.
Sure. And, you said something earlier that I think is really telling, and that is life doesn't always go as planned. So in the game of football, everybody who's a football fan or has at least seen a game knows that the football game is the football game. But what happens right after that first whistle is blown until the last tick of the clock is anybody's guess. And you, in this section we called Move the Chains, you faced some pretty intense, I would call them interceptions perhaps, or even sacks, where you found yourself out of position that you'd been going along in life. Things were as you were dreaming of, and then suddenly out of nowhere comes this, and it forced you to really play out of position. Can you talk more about that time in your life, Mark, and what were some of the things that you drew on to to really stay the course and figure out what to do next?
Well, this is where I sort of have these three watchwords that have really helped me guide me through all of this. And they're faith, hope, and courage. For number one, the faith part of my life is what really allowed me to make the choices that I did, knowing that life is short, and as a spouse, you take the the vows, for in sickness and in health, and for better or worse. And so when we were facing this, it was clear to me that that would be my role, and that I would leave the business world and transition. I guess in a football term, all of a sudden I was the quarterback of under a new situation, and I had to take it in a different direction. And by doing that, it gave me hope and courage. I learned a lot. I studied about the disease and about caretaking, and especially as a man turning from husband to 100% husband to then all of a sudden transitioning to 20% caregiver, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 95% caregiver and 5% husband through the process. I drew on those things. The other part of it is I got involved in the Alzheimer's community, in advocating, in running a support group for others that were dealing with this, because I realized I had learned a lot of valuable lessons about how to shift gears to take care of someone full-time like this. And in the education process of trying to figure out how best to care for someone to make the most of every moment instead of let it overwhelm me, which, at times it can.
Oh, absolutely. And you brought something up that is so important for everybody to remember, all of us, is that when faced with a challenge, when finding ourselves out of position or in a new position based on circumstance, we need to surround ourselves with a team. We need to rely on our team to carry us along, that we're not out there by ourselves. And yet, I think in this country, there's still that myth or that almost allure of the lone wolf, the lone cowboy, that each of us can handle it all on ourselves, and clearly knew that wasn't going to be possible and reached out. And even though you were in a role that was new and unfamiliar, you were able to lean on people that could really help you through that. And that is, I think, a lesson that we can always be reminded of, because it's easy to just think, I can handle it, right? I can handle it. We're all hungry for inspiration. We're all hungry for that story that is different enough from ours that makes us believe in something, or at least plant a seed. And I think the tough situation you had with taking care of your wife and then having to end that chapter and then use the motorcycle riding as a way of filtering through things and reconnecting with your own spirit as well as the world's. There are people who are going to listen to this and they want to do something like that, and this might be just enough for them to say, you know what, I can't wait any longer. I have to do something.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of them because they always go, what words of advice do you have? And it's like, do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it in some way. It doesn't have to be like mine. It can be your other dream. It doesn't have to be as long, and all those things, but definitely live it. Yeah. And then I was thinking this morning, it's like, you know what? In a year from now, you're going to look back and go, that was just a little moment in time.
So looking at the world today, and you were out in the whole world, you have that perspective that few people have. 2.5 years on the road, on a motorcycle, out in the open air. But the world has changed very quickly in the last few years with the onslaught of technology, with the ability for you to blog from all over the place and people follow you and get to know you and open their homes to you. In your trip, or now that you're back stateside, what are some specific shifts or changes that you've witnessed that have been both positive and perhaps a little bit negative to this great human experience we're all on?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as I traveled, it was amazing watching the adults that I ran into, especially as I was about to head into Mexico and Central America. Everybody was telling me, oh my gosh, you're going to die by the cartels or the banditos, because of all of our news media, sharing all the negative things happening around the world. And so for me, one of the things you learn is there were people all over the world, regardless of our culture and our language and all those things. We have the same desires and concerns and fears regardless. And so for me, the lesson learned was the kindness of strangers that I met along the path was absolutely amazing. And if nothing else, it makes me want to reach out to other people that I can help in very simple ways. As the recipient on the road, when I had a breakdown and people helped, or even just getting simple directions or guiding you through maybe places that were a little more dangerous than others, that kind of kindness all around us, kind of one of those pay it forward moments, is we should all do that, reach out to people around us that need help.
Yes. And who is someone, Mark, that you have had the wonderful experience of being the recipient of that kind of generosity, where somebody, it might have been a coach or a mentor at some point in your life? Talk more about people who have influenced and reached out to you.
Yeah, I look back early in my childhood. I played sports, and obviously the teamwork and coaching that I received as a young man really, I think, sets the stage to just what you're talking about, that you can't do it alone. You have to have other players on your team. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. And so I think in that way, I look back to my coaches in my young elementary school and junior high, and a lot of lessons learned there. I think as far as mentors, not necessarily a coach, but I had a high school teacher that really helped guide me from the high school arena into my college days and sort of set a path there, which is really great. And then as I've grown into adulthood, what I've found is, you can't do it alone. And facing a disease like this, it's fairly isolating because people don't know how to respond typically. And so by surrounding myself, in my case, I have a group of guys that I've been meeting with for about 18 years to encourage each other, to lift each other up, and in prayer, and also in just focusing on doing the right things in life. And so for me, those guys have been invaluable in trying to navigate this difficult life. That was before I left. And now that I've been on the road, I was the recipient of kindness in many simple ways. And it really, really struck me that throughout the world, there are really generous and kind people, many more than there are the bad guys, even though there's plenty of bad guys out there.
Did you run into any bad guys on your trip? And if you did, you had a good story about something like that?
Yeah, it's really funny. I think being a prudent traveler, I tried to avoid situations that were bad, although we were in sometimes some neighborhoods and things that weren't as nice. But I never really had any huge issue personally. I did meet people that were robbed at gunpoint or on the streets, but those were typically in big cities and in areas that are known for this kind of thing. So for me, I was fairly fortunate. I stayed away from it, but part of it was intentionally not being out late at night in neighborhoods that I didn't know, and those kinds of things that I think reduced your chances. It was also listening to locals and other people tell you about, hey, that's sort of a dangerous area for this reason, and weighing up, do I go there or not? And so I think I avoided most of the issues in that way.
And you're talking about this fear issue that I know is fairly pervasive in our country anyway. At least it seems to be. When you sit down with people and you tell them, hey, I'm thinking about doing this ride around the world, and people responded to you in a very interesting way. Talk more about what kinds of responses you were getting as you were getting ready to go.
Well, I rode around the United States and Canada first for about 3 months. And so it was really, they'd been watching the news, and there was a lot of bad news about Mexico especially. But so people were, oh my gosh, you're going to die. Or they were asking, oh my gosh, how can you afford this? And those were the two big questions that adults had. Of course, for me, I kind of, you got used to the questions going, well, number one, it's a choice for me to take a certain amount of money to go live the dream on this trip. And the second part of it, knowing I'll take care of myself the best I can, and it's dangerous in all over the world, so that nobody gets out of having dangerous situations. What I really have to smile about is I had a situation where another motorcycle rider invited me into his home, and then set up this situation where I could teach class for his 9-year-old daughter for about an hour and a half about my trip and my journey. And the questions the kids had were so much better than the adults in so many ways. They started off with practical questions like, where are you going to carry your water or your food, or where will you eat or sleep, those kinds of questions. And then quickly, one girl in the back, I'll never forget this, raised her hand and she goes, what if you get lonely? Which was far better question than any question I had of adult security. But it was good. It was really refreshing that kids see it in more plain terms. And I think that made a big impact on me when I left, thinking, well, let's worry about the other issues, not safety.
And what did you say to that girl about loneliness? Do you remember how you answered that?
It was a tricky one because Chris, my wife, had passed away 6 months earlier. So I had a hole in my heart, like part of me was ripped away. So it was still fresh that I had this loss in my life, and, I was still grieving. But I also realized that, number one, there's alone and there's loneliness, and they're two different things. And I think all of us go through points in our life where we're feeling alone, even if people are around us, where we just don't feel connected or fitting in, or we're in pain or loss or grief, and feel like no one else is sort of in that same place, but it will pass. We get through it. And so for me, I think I just made comment about those two types of things, and that I would be able to persevere through the lonely days and make the most of the positive times.
Yes, and that feeling of being out of position, I think, is when we're more vulnerable to the loneliness, because our world has shifted, whether it's of our own doing or circumstances beyond our control. What advice would you give somebody today, knowing what you know now, about how to get back in position, or how to get back at least on the field to keep moving the ball down towards the end zone?
What I would say most is you just have to do it. And it's pulling enough, I guess, comes back to my faith, hope, and courage. This is where the courage part of it says to me, you need to get out of bed and connect with people that will help you get through those things. You're not going to always be able to do it on your own. For a guy, that's a bit humbling, asking for help in those areas. But I think in the end, that's a huge plus as you get out into life. And I'm in a transition now, and the transition of taking care of Chris, the transition to a motorcycle trip, and I just returned, and so now I'm transitioning to, oh my gosh, I got to go back to work. So I'm in the next one, and I've certainly gone through all the emotions of it all. Being able to enlist friends and other people to help you through those hard times really, really pays off.
It definitely does. And so you're on the playing field. The end zone's in sight. You have scored a touchdown before, and you can do it again. So let's take the ball into the end zone, Mark, and score a touchdown. Tell listeners, if you would, one highlight, one big moment, one touchdown in your life. It could be as far back as when you were a kid, or it could be as recent as last week. What's one thing that you really are most proud of and celebratory of?
Well, I think I would have to say making the decision to take care of my wife at critical time, I have to say I'm most proud of. I know it's impacted a lot of people because it wasn't the path that most people take, giving up a career in the middle of your career to do it. But I think as I look back on my life, I will be most proud of that moment, making the decision and then going forward the best I could. Wasn't always easy, didn't always handle it the best way, but in the end, it was the right choice. I'd say that's the biggest touchdown. The next part of the touchdown will be, I think, a chapter to be written. As I sit here, on the face of new transitions, how do I handle those to be positive and go forward in a good way? This next chapter will be really important in that way.
Yes, it will. And you've lived long enough to have a book of offensive strategies, the Playbook of Mark Donham. Could you share one or two key things that listeners could implement right away to move the chains of their lives and our businesses forward? Because we all know that people get stuck, and people listening today may be wondering, what can I do? So what would you offer listeners today?
Number one, we have to really learn to adapt. And the way to do that, I think, is to, number one, accept our situations wherever they fall, look clearly at them, and learn as much as you can about your options, and then make a choice and go kind of boldly in the direction of that choice. And I think people get stuck sometimes because they see a big hurdle or hurdles in that direction, when ultimately, if you make the decision, you can figure out how to get over those hurdles. And then by learning and growing yourself, you're able to take advantage of those. And then the other part of it, I know, is also being able to change direction as needed, sort of like on the football field. If you're running one way and all the defenders are heading that way, sometimes cutting back the opposite way is the right way to go. Just being open to those new options instead of carrying on in a direction that's not going to take you very far. So you can't be afraid of that change, which I think a lot of us are.
Yes, I think it's something we all battle with, the fear of change. We get comfortable, and even if it's not our ideal situation, it's familiar, right?
the comfort zone is for sure. When I talk to people about my trip, they're always like, you went on this motorcycle trip solo? And, again, it was like out of their comfort zones completely. And so I think you're right. The comfort zone, and people get stuck in that rut, so to speak, of where they're comfortable. But in the end, that comfort can shift to new places if you're willing to have the courage to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mark, what is the best way for people to connect with you online?
Right now, through RadiomanRidesTheWorld.com is my web blog of my travels. If they go to the Who is Radio Man, there's some videos about why I'm called Radio Man, and some videos when I was taking care of my wife, a little bit of the backstory of that chapter of life, and that prompted me to the next period of life on the motorcycle. And there is my email address. If people want to respond, I would gladly correspond with them.
Terrific. And I can say that having met you and had lunch with you, and you are a tremendously generous human being with so much to give, and a great set of stories that are universal as well as deeply personal. And for people listening today, all of what Mark has shared can be found in the show notes at maryloukayser.com/Radioman. So you can go over there and connect with Mark directly from there, and also see some of the things that he talked more about. So Mark, I want to thank you for your time today, for your generosity in sharing your story with listeners of the Play Your Position podcast. And I look forward to seeing you in another venue.
All right. Thank you very much, Mary Lou. It's been fun to share.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's guest as much as I did. And remember, you can find the show notes from today's episode over at maryloukayser.com/podcast. I would also so appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to leave me a quick 5-star review on iTunes so more people can find this program and benefit from the wisdom my guests share. I look forward to seeing you on future episodes, and in the meantime, it's a great day to get out there and play your position.
Thanks for listening to the Play Your Position podcast, where your story matters and we make it count at maryloukayser.com.